Hi there, and welcome to this very exciting tutorial on how to be a pro at using Keyshot. In this tutorial, we'll cover a few workflow tips and tricks and some things that you might not be aware of that you can do within Keyshot, as well as how to improve the overall quality of the finished results. So without further ado, we are in Alibre design, and we have a beautiful model of a drill press by William Forsyth. And the first thing that we're going to do is make sure that the bottom of our model, in this case, this surface here, pretty obvious, is aligned with one of the three principal planes. And most of the time, just by the nature of how you model stuff in Alibre design, this will already be done for you. But just be sure that it is, because it's so much easier if you need to rotate this inside of Keyshot. That allows you to be able to do it by easy increments like 90 or 180. If it's off in the middle of nowhere at an odd angle, you'll never get it right, and it'll just be an exercise in patience. So the second thing that you want to do is make sure that you're always giving Keyshot enough geometry to work with. So the way that you do that is you go to the gem and you go to Properties, select Display, and make sure that your facet resolution is on Fine. Now, for huge models, maybe you don't want to work with the facet resolution on Fine inside of Alibre design day to day. That's totally fine. Just make sure that before you send it to Keyshot, you send it back, you set it to Fine, and then you can set it back to a lower value. We're already at Fine, and so we're going to go ahead and go into Keyshot. To do that, we'll click Keyshot and Render, and I already have it open. So this is the way that it looks when it first comes in. Now, you'll notice that I don't have my window set to take up the entire screen. I'm on a 4K monitor. I don't need all that taxing on my PC during this initial phase when I'm just applying some textures. So I set it to lower. I set it to 1500 by 1500, or maybe you want to do 1000 by 1000, whatever makes sense that gives you kind of a really responsive interaction with Keyshot. The second thing I'll do is I'm going to turn on performance mode. I don't need all the fancy shadows and the reflections and things like that right now, because my primary objective is to do a bunch of clicking and assign a bunch of materials. And I don't, my primary objective here in consideration is being able to see stuff. And so taking out all the shadows makes that easier. So the workflow that I'm going to use here is perhaps a little bit unintuitive, and you'll see why we do it in a second. And this is especially a good workflow for really big models, or maybe you have hundreds of fasteners, and any kind of model like that, it's going to be a lot of clicking, and you want to make sure that you're clicking in the most efficient way possible. So the way that I found after rendering, thousands of models in Keyshot is the following workflow. I'm not going to worry about the correct materials. I don't care about any of that. What I want to do is get something that's high visibility, that's easy for me to see, and link a bunch of parts that are the same material to that. So let me give you an example. The top of this plastic housing is made up of a lot of different parts. And my objective right now is to link them together. That's the only objective. So I'm going to just drag any material onto there. And I suggest like shiny paints because they render quickly. I'm going to shift left click on this one as the source. And I'm going to start shift right clicking on every other part in this model that I can see that shares this material. And I think that's about it. So now my next piece of the workflow is to hide all of these parts so that they get out of the way. So I'm going to go to the Scene tab, and I'm going to right click on any of these parts that I've just applied materials to. And I'm going to select parts with material. And then I'm going to go over here and I'll see, one of them is selected along with the rest. Click on any one of those and visibility hide. All right, that just gets them out of the way. And especially if you have a bazillion fasteners or lots of stuff, you'll very quickly see the value in this workflow. Okay, number two is I'm going to pick any different color, doesn't matter what it is, and I'm going to apply the same material wherever else that would be in the model in much the same way. I think that's probably all of those. I'm going to right click, select parts with material, go over to one of them, visibility, and hide. Right? Now let's work on the fasteners. And you'll notice I don't care what material. None of these are actually painted. Maybe some are. But I'm picking really high visibility stuff. And what that lets me do is, I can kind of easily notice if something's not red, right? And so that's the primary reason I want to do that, or fuchsia or anything else. Okay. Now we're ready to kind of, see the fruits of our labor. So I'm going to right click, I'm going to show all parts. And this looks a lot more grouped than it used to. We have all our fasteners in red, we have the anodized material in purple, we have the shiny metal in orange, and I can, quickly see if I've missed something, but it's just gray or something. I can go through and, assign it the right material. And, perhaps those are all the same color. Okay. So now what we're going to do, now that we've grouped everything, is actually start the fun part, which is applying the correct materials to things. So the way that you're going to do this is pick which one you want, and you're going to drag it and drop it onto any of the components. Doesn't matter which one. They're all linked together. And so, for example, this purple stuff's probably an anodized. So let me go find a metal, anodized, maybe a dark blue. Looks pretty good. This is going to be, some kind of brushed aluminum. And this orange stuff is going to be probably just a regular, rough aluminum. Right. So we can start to see this has taken some pretty good shape. I missed a few of them up here, so I'm going to apply the same material to there. And maybe I'll just change this yellow to a type of paint. So it's a little bit more shiny. And we're starting to get where we want to be. Now, one thing we haven't done yet is change the fasteners. So I'm going to just make those a little bit darker, maybe an iron or something. And, choose whatever materials obviously are appropriate for your model. But you can see in this way, it's really easy. Once you group stuff, it's really easy to play around, right? I can say, well, maybe the color needs to be, different or darker or more red or yellow or whatever. It's easy to do when they're grouped, so you don't have to do it to every single instance of a different material, right? So that's the reason we do that, and just to make less clicking and kind of going back and forth to things we forgot or didn't see. All right, now that we've gotten our model mostly textured, we're going to go ahead and turn on basic lighting. And this is where it starts to looking good. The next decision that we have to make is probably the most impactful on the final quality of your model. And that is, what is the background lighting going to do? So if you go to the Environment tab, you'll see that we have all these different options, right? You can drag them all on and see the effects. Some of these have, studio lighting, have these kind of sharp shadows and high contrast. Anyway, you have lots of different options here on things that you might want to do. And they all change the lighting of the model dramatically. So the primary takeaway that you need to know here is that you are not restricted to just using the default ones inside of Keyshot. There's a lot of good ones, but there's also a lot of really good ones that are not here by default. So I suggest that you go to hdrihaven.com. The good thing about this is that everything is on a CC license. It's all 100% free. You can use it in your production work. Very few restrictions. So it's a great place there's no reason not to take advantage of it. So go to HDRIs at the top. And one that I'm really partial to is on the indoor. It's this Autoshop 01. And the reason that this one is really good, if you look at some of the other ones, you'll notice that they're cast in a color, right? This is very yellow. This is very blue, very blue. This one is a really nice even tone. And so the reflections that it gives are just, it's consistently a really great HDRI to use. So let's grab this one. We'll click on it, and we're going to make a decision down here. Now, this is where you need to do a little bit of thinking, right? You'll notice that when I drag an HDRI on, it actually replaces the background, right? And you'll notice these backgrounds are pretty blurry. And that's because the HDRIs that come in Keyshot, many of them are low resolution. So if you find a great HDRI and you say, okay, I'm done, let's render this puppy out, it's not going to look good because all of this is blurry and just not crisp and precise, right? So you have a few options here. One option would be to change the background type to maybe a color or maybe an image that you have. But so if you want to use the HDRI as the background and to be able to see it in the final render, make sure you get like an 8K or a 4K at a minimum. If you plan on changing the background to just use a color, and at this point, the primary purpose of the HDRI is just to light the scene, then more often than not, maybe you can get away with, a 4K or a 2K. 4K is probably a good middle ground for most use cases. The higher you go, the longer it can take to render. So just be aware of that trade-off there. Anyway, when you find one that you want, we'll use a 4K. It's going to download, and I have a copy of this on my desktop. So find out wherever you downloaded it to, and go to the Environment tab and just drag it in, just like that. And you'll see now it's available to be used, right? So this is now being lit based off the thing I just downloaded. Now the one that I like again is this Autoshop one. So when I talked about earlier, I'm going to drag that one on. And you can see it just gives a really, really nice, consistent, well lit result with some good reflections. So we're pretty much on our way to where we want to be. The next thing is we're going to notice that some of this is a little dark. So I'm going to just increase the lighting value right on the canvas. Just press up on your keyboard. And this is starting to look better to our eye. Your mileage may vary based on your model and your materials. Now we have another problem to solve, and this is a common problem that you'll see. Some of the parts of the model are just totally washed out. They're just white. And this is something that you want to avoid because this rarely happens in real life. So some of that you can kind of just move it a little bit, maybe get it out of that direct reflection. And some of it you need to modify the material. So in this case, no amount of wiggling it around is going to really make this better. So I'm going to double click the material and actually change it, change the color of it to where it looks, a little bit more like what I want. And I might do the same for these metal. Maybe I'll make them a little bit like that. And then the last thing that I think people don't do often enough is kind of tweak the way your metals look. So the biggest factor you're going to find here is the roughness setting. The default roughness, I think, on most Keyshot materials is 0.1. Now, you can get some really nice effects, especially if you use a good HDRI by setting this a little bit lower. Now, obviously, depending on what the actual shininess value that you're going for is, you may or may not need to change this. But I find that values between 0.01 and maybe 0.1 are where you want to mess with. So I actually start at 0.18 a lot, or 0.018 rather. And that kind of gives, maybe that's a little bit too shiny for this particular model, but maybe 0.0, 0.25. It's a little bit better. So this is starting to look pretty good. We've kind of set up everything. We've gotten a really crisp, good HDRI that we can reuse on this model and every other model that we have. And we've grouped our materials, and they're really easy to change now. And so kind of some of the final steps is just deciding, what you want your your lighting to be. Product is, pretty good. It's a good compromise for most scenarios. And so select product, and then for your background, select your background. Either you're going to use the lighting environment or the color. And a thing to note with color, if you plan on rendering this out as a transparent image and then putting it onto another background, maybe your website is dark gray, and here you are rendering this on a white background, and you think to yourself, oh, well, it's a transparent picture. It doesn't matter. It does matter, and it matters a lot. The reason it matters is because when you render it out transparent, Keyshot's going to anti-alias the edge. And that's a fancy way of saying it's going to smooth it out with a little bit of kind of a blur almost. What Keyshot's going to do is blur it with white, because that's the background here. So even if we render this out transparent, the edges of the model are still going to inherit some of that color. So if I go put this transparent image onto a dark background, it's going to have this white edge, and you're going to hate it. So just kind of have that in mind, right? If I think to myself, okay, this is going to be on a blue background, make your background somewhat blue-ish. It doesn't have to be perfect, but now the anti-aliased edge is going to be in the blue family, and it's not going to be so obvious. This also affects the shadows in a pretty significant way. So if you ever, put something that you had a white background on with a bunch of shadows onto a dark background later on in your workflow, you'll notice all the shadows look white, and it makes no sense. And this is why. So just try to, think a little bit ahead and match what you might be using later on in your workflow. That's about it. Hopefully you guys learned some good stuff, make some great renders, and share them with us on the forum. Have a great day.